Hi, I'm Ellen Hume Howard, the Executive Director at the New Hampshire Learning Initiative. We're really pleased to talk to you about our PACE project and to share it with you as an example of how you might be able to transform your own state's accountability system, not as an apples to apples comparison, but as an example of a type of transformative change that's possible through funding sources like CGSA and through the support of initiatives like AIADA. In a moment, you'll hear from my colleagues about how we developed and executed the project. But first, I want to emphasize the collaborative nature of the work and the trust that it engendered. I believe it was the collaboration and trust that were the magic ingredients to our success. One of the biggest things we learned was the power of a healthy exchange of ideas between our teachers and administrators at the districts. The healthy exchange helped us move our project closer to the classroom. It also impacted teachers across the project to raise their expectations, to collaborate, to have expectations for students that were aligned with what the standards were. If I were to take a snapshot right now where we are with our project called PLACE, which is the next iteration of PACE, I would say that collaboration and trust are at its core, and the teachers continue to build and continue to lead this project because they see so much value in the development of performance assessment. I hope that you were able to apply some of the umbrella lessons we've learned from PACE and that you're about to learn a little bit more about with Marianne and Kathy's presentation to your own state and possibly your CGSA application.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're so happy to be here. We are thrilled to be able to share with you some of the ways that we were able to make a performance-based accountability system work well in New Hampshire. I do want to mention that Ellen Hume Howard, who couldn't be here today, the current executive director of NHLI, was very much a part of the aspects of PACE that we're going to talk about today. She worked as the PACE system curriculum director, and so really assisted all of the teachers across all schools to embed the curriculum-based performance assessments for accountability and to make sense of it. Kathy White, as Paul said, was Dean of Faculty at one of our most early joining high schools, a very innovative high school that was able to fully implement the promise of PACE. And so we were able to use their actions as a proof point and help some of the districts who weren't as far along by using Kathy's work and her examples. And myself, I was at the Department of Education and was the state director of PACE and was part of the group with Paul, who actually developed the policies, the processes, and led the work across the districts. And that was my responsibility, and it was onerous, I can tell you. And I also want to call out somebody who is among the group today. Dan French was with us in the early years and was very much a partner with us on this work as a consultant and helped us to develop some of the theories and the practices that made the PACE work successful. So we are going to take you on a little trip, a little mind jaunt into the past of when PACE was used as an accountability system. Oh, sorry, I didn't notice the slide changed. The first thing I want to point out is that when we began our project in accountability, when we received the waiver that districts could drop their standardized state assessment and take part in this kind of grand experiment, we very much looked at it as action research. And so we had questions that we wanted to answer, and we were going to answer them through different ways of collecting data around student performance and achievement. So one of our questions was, can performance assessment, if done methodically and with a reasonable amount of consistency across districts, yield valid and reliable information on student group, school, and disaggregated population academic progress? And if it can, how will this information compare with the standardized testing results that we had been using for so many years? We also wanted to know, will schools and districts be willing and will they be able to implement performance assessment and to collect the raw data necessary when that is implemented? And then the final question was, what supports and resources are needed for educators, schools, and districts to participate fully in the implementation and data collection and to apply continuous improvement based on data analysis results? So we were looking for all of these 4 ambitious processes, but we were flexible in terms of if we answered one, then what was the next question? This theory of action was actually developed. We did have a theory of action simpler than this, but this was developed when we had a third-party evaluation by the HUMRO organization. And they went through all of our documents. It was really like having an audit or a colonoscopy, you can choose. Every document, every process, every action was examined by the third party. And they determined that this is the direction, our premise, our activities, and our outcomes. And our really what we were looking for, our end goal, was the authentic preparation of students for life after secondary. As we were developing this method, we averred that no students would be harmed by the scores they received as they too were developing and as their teachers were developing their performance assessment literacy and their ability to learn and be assessed in this way. That meant that if students received less than competency achievement, all participants felt a responsibility and obligation to assess students towards competency. Failure must be seen as only the first attempt in learning. This process of assessment and accountability was not a gotcha type assessment. Now, this is what it looked like from the state viewpoint. This was our goals, our bigger picture. But the district responsibilities and viewpoint were a little bit different. And Kathy, as a lead in that arena, is going to speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. So from our district or school perspective, our responsibilities and also was really reciprocal. And so what happened was we really implemented teacher leadership. So we often talk about student agency, but in the PACE project, we had teacher agency because teachers working alongside all of the many experts that we had in the room really were the ones who took the lead on supporting their peers and developing task and professional learning. So in order to have that happen, we as district folks had to commit to release time for teachers so that they could be involved in the task development and the professional learning sessions. But we also had dedicated ourselves to curriculum embedded assessments based on those competencies and standards. So there was a lot of alignment work that happened during this time. And we prioritized this instruction for both grade level and state level assessment. And we also guaranteed that we would be involved in the data collection, and we'll detail that data collection for both the federal and state accountability. So essentially what happened was PACE was not necessarily every year at every grade level. So this chart just shows you that on the different grade levels, PACE might occur in ELA one year, in math the next year, in science. So we were waived for a while from the New Hampshire State Assessment in science. And there were other years where we actually did the SAS in one of those content areas. And what we learned, and Marianne was reminding me of this earlier, that although we had that waiver from the state assessment, we did use the New Hampshire SAS as that comparability tool. And we found that students, after becoming acclimated to the performance assessment work in PACE, actually did better on the state assessments. And we also found that the scores were comparable and reliable, although taken in different years. So that was our no harm guarantee. So the nitty-gritty of the data collection, which, when we first started, we started with, let's get those PACE common tasks and student work samples so that we could get together and do our comparability, our consensus scoring among the different teachers from different districts. And I think our first year we had, I feel like we did 300 assessments that we scored, and I think there were 3 that were people actually brought forward as not having come to consensus on. So that work continued every year, but we also collected student bodies of work samples. So that was, teachers were asked to collect those from 5 to 7 students during the year, so that we could help document and evaluate student performance throughout the year along with the PACE Common Task. And that collection supported standard setting activities and scoring calibration activities during the PACE Summer Institute as well. We also, as districts, engaged in double scoring so that we could attain our own inter-rater reliability statistics. And the double scoring was also a critical step for documenting the quality of that scoring on the PACE Common Tasks across the districts. Also, there was the, within district, we also guaranteed that we would do consensus scoring. And we also looked at what we could do for anchor paper. So that was another collection activity that took place internally, but was also really beneficial across the districts. And then again, at the end of the year, we gave our end of the year competency scores in our content areas so that that could be used in the annual determination. So Marianne's going to take us through the next 8 data collection items.
So I just want to make a note on the consensus scoring, the inter-rater reliability. I was the one that ran the statistics on inter-rater reliability for PACE, and teachers in their scoring across districts rated between 75 and 80% on inter-rater reliability. And this is virtually unheard of. Inter-rater reliability and scoring is very hard to attain. But once teachers were given that assessment literacy, the practice and the ability to learn both from experts and from each other, they really became reliable in their judgments. So I'm going to talk about the bottom 4. This is kind of a picture of what kind of data needed to be collected in our grand experiment. And one of the ones that gave us a lot of information we called teacher judgment surveys. The teacher judgment survey asked teachers to classify their students based on PACE achievement level descriptors, or ALDs, in any given grade or subject. The ALDs articulated the expected levels of performance related to the knowledge and skills that were described in those grade level content standards. And the ALDs were written by groups of teachers across districts, facilitated by assessment experts. The results of the teacher judgment surveys were one variable used to produce a student's annual determination of proficiency. In other words, teachers classified each student individually. They looked at their work across a year, and they used holistic scoring. In other words, looking at this student as a whole what level of competency did they reach this year, including all of their assessments, all of their evaluations. And then this was compared to the performance related to other assessments, performance assessments, and standardized assessments. The common task scores is something that was pretty unique to PACE. We required that schools implement the same performance task across all participating districts that we're using this for accountability. And we analyzed those scores across the districts and within the districts. So without the common tasks, we wouldn't have been able to have those comparability scores. And this became an important piece of information for the federal folks in terms of assuring them that the validity and reliability of this type of assessment was arising. It really took about 2 years for that to be achieved. So in those common task scores, districts reported the PACE task, the common task score for each student, and the blind double scoring for their inter-rater reliability. That was used to evaluate the extent that teachers evaluate student work the same way across districts. And it was reconciled with the calibrated scores that were generated from the PACE Summer Institute. Kathy's going to talk more about the PACE Summer Institute in our next slide, but this was an important event, both for scoring calibration, for data comparisons, and as a training event for teachers in scoring. The next one, the assessment maps, was one of my favorites. This was actually a federal requirement, and it was an opportunity for a district to receive feedback on the scope and sequence and quality of their local assessment system through an evaluation of their local assessment maps and summative assessments. Each year, there was a different subject area identified for review, and it rotated. So it might be math, elementary 1 year, and middle school ELA the next year. Each subject area was reviewed about once every 3 years. So what the districts did is they created a grid of subjects and assessments for each course in their school, each class in their school. And they recorded when assessments happened and what type of assessments they were. And in the interest of time, we didn't include an example, but it really is a significant process that is extremely meaningful on the local level. Some of the things that were revealed was that in a certain math class, students were being assessed through rote memorization every day of every week of that 16-week course. But in a comparable math class taught by a different teacher, students were being assessed through performance assessments twice a year. So schools, when they received their analysis, and 1 year I did the analysis, and after that year, we had a different, we hired a group to do it. It looked at the equitable and even distribution that was achieved by local districts around assessment. And many of those activities resulted in local assessment implementation, scoring, and evaluation changing and becoming more fair, becoming more student-centered, and becoming more in line with assessment practices that are best for kids, which should neither be too numerous or too unavailable. The final data collection was the annual assurances. This was really a requirement by the New Hampshire DOE that districts say they would comply with the requirements of IADA to us at the department. that they would consult with affected stakeholders, and that part changed from consulting with affected stakeholders to including affected stakeholders in the design and implementation decisions, and ensuring all teachers who administered PACE common tasks that they received proper training prior to administration. And then the State Department was required to update the list of participating schools, subject areas, and grade levels every year. Kathy is going to take you through what it looks like, what all of those 8 data collections looked like on the local level for teachers.
Thanks, Marianne. So right, it sounds pretty onerous to listen to all of those elements, but really when it comes down to it, pretty simplified at the teacher level. So we would look for, if I'm a 6th grade math teacher, I would identify 5 to 7 students that I would, just collect some work, their work over the year. And one of those could be the PACE task. And then we would implement that common task in the classroom. We calibrate scoring with our colleagues and conduct that double scoring. And then we would make sure that, we selected whatever tasks were going to be sent as samples for the Summer Institute. And then I would share my common task scores with the administrator, which would pretty much be in my rank book anyways. And then I'd work with my team to create that assessment map that Marianne was describing for 6th grade math. And then in the spring, I would complete that teacher judgment survey, which really only did not take very much time at all. And then colleagues in the other areas would complete theirs. And then the district really downloaded all of the other data, the competency, the end of year scores, and would gather that and send it along. And then, of course, I would probably volunteer for the Summer Institute. And really, teachers loved this institute. It gave them an opportunity to work with peers across the state. So if they hadn't been involved in the task development, they might take the opportunity to be involved in the Summer Institute. So that's really what that would look like for a teacher as we collected the data for PACE. And some of the outcomes of PACE, this was a alternative accountability system, but it really impacted not just how we looked at accountability from a state level, but within our districts, we had much stronger models relying on teacher leadership. That migrated from the PACE project to the local districts and schools. It resulted in increased teacher agency and being able to develop those the competencies and standards aligned curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And it became, what happened is we ended up with meaningful curriculum embedded performance assessments. Students could talk for years about their performance assessment, whether it was the Anolis lizard task or the water tower or the cup stacking for math. And really be able to recall their learning from those experiences. And the other interesting that happened is teachers identified early on for themselves that while we would love for students to be able to do these rigorous performance assessments, what we now know is that we have to change our instruction to be able to prepare students for that. So it became part of the data that they used in their PLCs. Ellen calls this the data embedded system. Really that street data that Shane Saphir and Jamal Dugan talk about. Looking at those classroom assessments, their rubrics, and the student work for informing that instruction and interventions.
So what happened with all this data? Where did it go? How did it transfer to other areas of a student's life? Well, I spent a lot of my time as the PACE state director working with colleges and universities in the state around this question. Colleges responded to PACE results and processes with enthusiasm, but with cautious enthusiasm. We found that the college and university administrators and the admission directors, those who were part of the bigger picture for their universities, were thrilled at the fuller picture they got of students through their competency-based PACE transcript and portfolios. They thought that college persistence was clearly represented in the types of essential skills that were demonstrated within the performance task completion and the student's ability to speak to that and to describe their learning and their ownership of their learning. But as you went down to the boots on the ground level, admission counselors were mildly interested. Given their caseloads, they overwhelmingly fell back onto ranked scores in making admissions decisions, even during in-person interviews. Although they liked the portfolios, they liked the way the students talked about the work they did and the way they could apply it, they really needed something more quick and dirty for making the complex decisions that they made. And so we had very mixed results, and even some cases where district leadership and district lawyers went to bat for students who were committed to giving a more competency-based interview with the admissions counselor. Districts reported PACE and CBE scores in various ways. With their parent and student community. As an example, in Sanborn High School, they reported both traditional grades and ranks and competency scores and essential skills information on both their transcripts and report cards. It really helped parents and students make sense of what they were reading and what they were seeing, particularly parents who hadn't been part of the process. The format was understandable to them. Schools in the project that switched abruptly to competency-based reporting had a strong pushback from stakeholders because they didn't understand what it meant in terms of college going. They didn't know the vocabulary of PACE or of competency-based education, and they didn't know what it meant comparable to the ranked scores, letter grades, and numbers that they were used to seeing. Sauhegan really took their time to plan and design their competency-based reporting during PACE. Several years ago, the transcript moved along the continuum of competency-based reporting. So what was the outcome ultimately? Why is New Hampshire, if this was so wonderful, which it was, why are we still not doing it? After a few years, the USCD sent us a letter, really a glowing letter, I can't say more than that they considered that New Hampshire had shown that performance assessment was a valid and reliable method of documenting student achievement and school and district accountability. They asked in this letter for New Hampshire to continue the effort, to refine its methods, to expand the implementation, and to disseminate methods and proof of concept to other states. During this time, when we were basking in the glow of having them told us we had answered our questions, other questions emerged. Districts began to ask, do we have to implement the exact same performance task to yield reliable and valid data? Could we use a task bank that allowed for student choice locally and district local control? We began to explore that question with a very robust task bank. New Hampshire districts were working on this and the inclusion of essential skills such as creativity, communication, and others when PACE was paused by the New Hampshire Education Department, and then after a year of pause, discontinued. The reason given to the districts and to the USCD by the New Hampshire Department was that districts were unwilling or unable to implement the data collection that they had participated in for the past several years. There is some evidence that this conclusion was premature, however, because almost all districts involved in PACE continued the PACE practices on the local level, even during that year of pause, and even after it was discontinued as an accountability system. They used the resultant data for local assessment information and improvement, as well as for student achievement. And that is why NHLI is working with over almost a third of the districts in New Hampshire on our PLACE project, which has really emphasized learning as well as assessment in performance methods. So that is information on the New Hampshire PACE project and how we developed our data and our data questions, our data methods, and what we did with the information. I understand that that you will have an opportunity to discuss this in your smaller groups. So we won't go into that now, but thank you very much for listening.